Welcome to SPSM Chat 3.0. I'm your host, Rudy Caseres, at Rudy Caseres on Twitter. And this is SPSM Chat. The S is for suicide. The S is for social. The medium, the M is for media. And the P, well, that's for property. How are you out there? I appreciate you all so much. Sorry for starting
Can you
late.
do that cold open again? That was good.
Yes, S is for suicide. S is for social. M is for media, and P, well, that's for property.
Seaside social media property.
Yes. So let's go around from, I guess, right to left. I guess we just lost Sarah again for the 1,000th time. Introduce yourself, Joelle, very quickly.
Hi, my name is Joelle Marie Nourse. I am a peer support specialist by training. I'm autistic. I have OCD, and I do a lot about kind of sharing those experiences and making things more accessible to people with all kinds of experiences.
Hudson.
Hi, I'm Hudson Harris. I have a very weird mental health background, but right now what I do is I work on system level design, advocacy work, and then I also do some specific micro approach. So how to bring evidence-based practices and technology into mental health to help improve the quality and accessibility of care.
Cool. And again, I'm Rudy Caseres, and I'm just a guy. I interview people. I have my own show, No Restraints with Rudy Caseres, which you can watch all episodes at norestraints.net. I'm also on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, again, at Rudy Caseres. My little handle is right here. And let me know if you're okay to go, Sarah.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes. Tell the whole world, the whole SPSM Chat universe, who is Sarah Schuster?
Hi everyone, I'm Sarah. I'm a writer, I'm an editor. Right now I work at The Mighty. I was their mental health editor for about 3 years, managing all their mental health content. And now I run our contributor network, basically helping people with real experiences tell their stories. We don't just do mental health, people also tell their stories about living with different chronic illnesses and disabilities. But the mental health section and suicide prevention always has like a special place in my heart. So that's why I'm here, and I'm friends with Rudy, friends with Joelle. I just met Harris, but you seem cool. And I'm having some technical difficulties, so hopefully you guys can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you loud and clear. And just to be clear, Sarah, everything you say is directly representative of the Mighty and their corporate values.
100%, of course, 100%. Yeah.
Yes, corporate values are being represented today on SPSM Chat 3.0.
So corporate. So
yes,
corporate.
And let us see what's going on Twitter. Gotta make sure I check in on them because you are part of it just as much as anyone else. So let's do the little screen share. So we're on question 1 right now, but hey Desiree, how you doing? Let's give some shout outs while we're here and we'll get to question 1. So hey Hudson sharing photos of his pig's tongue.
Oh yes, that's Hamlet.
That's awesome. Hey, Jess. Oh, also, if you're watching this live, please introduce yourself. Let us know you're here. If you're just going to be a lurker, that's okay too.
Okay. You should go back up and click on that tweet. That was pretty good, I heard.
I'm sure it was. Hey, Jess, how are you doing? Jess is taking a break away from binging on Netflix to see one of her favorite people, Sarah Schuster, Krista Marie, who is our fearless chat moderator, making sure that all of you are being seen out there. Jess says, in the future, I think it would be cool if you would post some resources. Yes. Jess, message me with that, okay? Because I want to make sure I get that right too. Hey, Desiree, how you doing? Okay, so cool. That's just a leftover from SPSM Chat of past Jess. So I'm all for alternatives as well. So question 1, like I said, let's get back to question number one: why is sharing your lived experience? I sound like I'm speaking in a library. It's just my voice is so resonant that I like tend to blow up my microphone
It's
and your
pretty
ears.
amazing right now. It has like a good, rich tenor.
Why is sharing your lived experience story important? Let's go with Sarah first off, and give a little background of why this is the theme, Sarah. Like how you are an expert on sharing your lived experience story. Because, well, I'll just let you take it from here.
I was thinking, but I guess to give some context, I mean, um, the mighty is the place where people are allowed to talk about their suicidal thoughts in a pretty like real way. And as an editor, one of my jobs is to help them tell a story, their stories in ways that are true to them. But also, we just help to make sure, like, not everyone who writes for us is necessarily a professional writer. So we help to make sure you guys. It's my roommate. Sorry. We help to make sure that that their stories are kind of just like easy to understand. And so that's why my background comes in. And also I write about like my own experience with suicidal thoughts and things like that. I hope that was enough of an answer for talking about myself.
Yes. Now, why is sharing your lived experience story important? This goes for people in general. I think Sarah is trying to like speak in
Sharing your story
hand
is so
signals. You there, Sarah?
I'm here. Can you guys hear me?
Yes. So continue.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, I was thinking about this question, and it really comes back to this idea that patient people tell their own stories is important in every single space because, in general, the nature of like any kind of like health field is that there's an expert and then there's a person who needs help, right? So that's kind of the dynamic that we've had for so long, that there's a quote unquote doctor and the person that he needs help. And in suicide, I think for too long, like this was kind of that, but to the extreme, this idea that people who with lived experience with suicidal thoughts, it wasn't that just they like weren't the expert, they also like weren't even allowed to talk about their own experiences, because there's this idea that people who are suicidal or who experience suicidal thoughts are too vulnerable and like can't handle these conversations, and that engaging with people with lived experience could actually be dangerous for them, which we know that isn't true. And also, I think people want to be a very clear cut. There's experts and there's doctors who will help you. And then again, there's like that patient who's suicidal, and that's like not what suicide is. We know that suicide is way more complex than that. And we know that when people who've been there aren't allowed to tell their stories, that it gives us crappy research. It gives us crappy interventions. It basically gets us where we are today, where nothing about like the real experience of being suicidal is taken into account. Hopefully, can you guys still hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, good. Where nothing about your actual lived experience is taken into account, and like the actual way we intervene with suicide. And so it's important. So there's two things. It's important for the fact that there is that really, it's kind of a cliche at this point, but it is important for people to know they're not alone. It's important for people to know that when you're suicidal, it's very isolating. So just to know that someone else has like had those dark thoughts is really important. It's also really important too, literally for like research and intervention's sake, and making the mental health system like a actual place that helps people. Because for too long, we didn't listen to people's actual experiences. And when we give them people the tools and the voice to share their own stories, it'll just make things better. It'll just push things in a better direction. And I think I was thinking about this today, the fact that I think also for so long, researchers and clinicians, they don't want to talk to their patients about suicide because, like it's triggering, or, they can't handle it. But I also think a big kind of like open secret is that people who are providers are also protecting themselves. They don't really want to, understandably, right, because like humans are naturally afraid of death. They don't want to go to these like dark places with people, or they're too scared to go to these dark places with people. So we make talking about suicide more normal and kind of like, yeah, like make it less scary for everyone involved. That's where real help can happen. So that's why I think it's that story. I think it's so important, especially in suicide, for so many different reasons. And I just spoke a lot, so I'm going to shut up for a second.
That's totally fine. You are the guest of honor. Let's go to Hudson, who, according to Desiree Stage, is a spoopy face.
A what?
A spoopy face.
What's a spoopy face? Is that a compliment? That feels like a compliment.
Well, anything coming from Desiree to you is a compliment. She loves the shit out of you. So let's go. Let's go, Hudson. Come on.
Okay. All right. So I actually tweeted out my response. I have found, I mean, I'd echo everything that you said, Sarah, but I think to me, like, when I've shared, when I've been there for people, I've had the experience a few times of having been there for people when they were at their lowest, and being able to share that common experience, I think, is so critical. And like I build on something that Sarah said, you know, this doctors and patients mentality. I think that there's something to be said for this idea that when we go through something and someone else has gone through it, that common experience, even if I'm not trying to solve your problem, even if my experience is entirely different than yours, just that understanding that we both walked the same path in some form or fashion, I think, is something that's it's safe. It's incredibly, I don't know. There's just something so real about being there for someone like that I will always want to share what I've been through with everybody, much to their chagrin.
Let's go to Joelle.
I think sharing lived experience is really important because, you know, there's the idea of observation, and that we can understand the whole story and the whole truth from observation, and that's just not so. And a lot of poor factual knowledge has been developed from simply observation, rather than the telling of internal experience, which really has most recently contributed to more appropriate care, more appropriate treatment, and more appropriate supports. So I think it's incredibly valuable to tell your own story, and to also help other people realize that what they're going through is either treatable, or that they can recover from it, or that they can find other supports, or that they're not a bad person, that it's something that is just happening to them, or that they're going through, and there's not something broken about them, which is incredibly important.
Let's see what the Twitter chat has to say. Lena, hi Lena, how are you? I appreciate you. She says, I think it's important for me and for others to share my #lived experience, often focusing on my grief of losing my sister to suicide, but having my lived experience dismissed is very painful, so I have learned to be a little more careful when I'm feeling vulnerable. Marshman says, also, I think he has a comment that he's replying to, so let's get back to that. Jess says, I kind of hate, quote unquote, telling my story, but I think understanding lived experience is a way for us to come to know about suicide and the efficacy of supports. Lived experience and research are both important and valid ways of learning about these issues, but lived experience has been silenced. And important, make sure to use #SPSM in all your tweets so I can see them and put them on screen. B. Mackey says, as annoying, extra dramatic as some find it, suicide and my own struggles with my own diagnoses are important to share with others. I too thought I was the only one who suffered like this. To discover the community and finding out I wasn't changed things for me and kept me alive. And hey, Christy, how are you doing? Let's get to Marshman's comment. So on the topic at hand, I've been meaning to write on my experience with ideation, no attempt, but plenty of almost. I know what that feels like. And it's combination, that's me saying that. And it's a combination with my chronic kidney disease and kidney transplant. Might do that this Christmas. Thank you so much, Marshman. Hope you're doing well. Hey, Lena, how are you as well? Okay, and then we're going to get to question number 2. But first off, I totally understand Jess's comment about sharing our stories. Like, I do that semi for a living whenever I can, and it's always hard because I don't want to tell like the traditional normal story arc of the recovery journey, but that's like what most people want, right? It's like you get these jobs at these conferences. Maybe Hudson can relate to this a little bit. They're looking for a certain type of story, a certain type of narrative, and the narrative isn't like fuck the mental health system and blah blah blah. It's so it can be very very difficult to share your story and not feel as if you're being funneled down into a certain narrative. So that's my 2 cents for that. Hey, insert witticism here. Joining from the UK due to sudden, I totally feel that. So question number 2. Let's get the camera back on me. What are some tips for sharing your story effectively? And again, if you're on the Twitter chat, you all are doing a fabulous job of doing this so far. So just reply either to the SPSM chat tweet with the question, with the graphic, with A2 and use the hashtag SPSM, or if you just want to do it on your own tweet, that's totally fine as long as you use A2 in some way and hashtag SPSM. Let's get to Sarah. What are some tips for sharing your story effectively?
Well, I can speak mostly to writing the kind of like personal essays, blog posts that we share on the Mighty. But I think like one of the most common, and it's really easy, I don't want to even say mistake, but kind of like one way maybe to not do it is to do what we call sharing like your journey story. So that's literally taking your entire mental health story, it started when I was 5, and kind of taking us through chronologically what happened to you. We find again, so we're also, I think, where's the word effective being, right? Like when I'm talking about effective right now, I'm really talking about like more just like what makes like good, like kind of like storytelling content like for the internet. Really bringing people into a moment or a specific angle or a specific kind of takeaway about your story, and starting with that, and then describing whatever it is around that. Is also like an easier way to write too for maybe people who are newer to writing about their stories. Instead of being like, okay, like how do I get, everything I've been through at 800 words, really nailing down what you want people to take away from it, and then describing and using kind of, I don't know, like tactics to kind of bring people there with you. That's kind of like always my first tip that I share.
Let's take it. No, that is a awesome answer, Sarah. Let's take it to Hudson, who I want to make sure to clarify that Desiree meant spoop it up, Hud.
Oh. I have even less understanding of what that means than the other thing you said. I will say, when it comes to telling my story, I found as I've gotten older and more, I don't know, I think better at knowing who I am and what I'm saying. I describe less about what happened and more about what I was going through. And so I think a lot of times the story that you're going through, at least the way that I've experienced, has been, if I'm being present in what I'm saying, if I'm being present in how I'm describing it, then I feel like I'm telling it well. Like if I catch myself narrating or I catch myself, monologuing, then I'm not really telling it. So like I think the key I would say is be present, like try and describe more about what it was like as opposed to like what happened. I know that seems like a weird distinction, but I guess there's more feeling in one than the other. Yeah.
Let's take it to Joelle.
I think that like Hudson said, for me, it's important to tell more about feelings and an internal experience, which is not exactly what he said, to be clear. But for me, it's important to share an internal experience. So factually or timeline wise, it's not as important to share specific details about things like self-harm or specifically what doctor or specific things that happen, but more like a feeling that happened. And that's really, for me, more what I want people to take away, because it really taps into empathy. And while we all use different words for things that we're feeling or things that happen, usually if I'm sharing feelings in different ways, it can help other people understand more of what's going on, and that can help share my experience and make it more relatable for people, and really help other people either seek support or understand what their loved ones are going through, or just have a more general understanding, more empathy for people in general. And I do think Sarah mentioned telling your story in writing. I do think it is important to figure out how you want to express what you're saying. So whether it's a period of time, whether you want to express a feeling, or whether you want to express defining your experience as a whole, I think that's important, and that's made it easier for me to write about things.
Let's see what the Twitter chat has to say. Desiree and Jess are competing for MVPs. And Lena, how are you doing? Lena says, for me, sharing lived experience effectively means trying to think what feels authentic to me and trying to communicate that back out with others. In public spaces, I tend to keep a filter with some suicide prevention themes, but I try not to let them lead. It's a balance. Desiree says it helps me to know who my audience is and what my goals are in speaking to them. Some audiences require different information. Desiree says all babies are in bed. Thank the good Lord, baby Jesus. I wasn't sure where I was going until I finished it. Jess says, I get really hung up on this. I think creating guidelines for this often pushes people to share stories in ways that achieve the goals of the organization or whatever creating them, instead of achieving the person's goals. Know what you are prepared to. This is, I can't see your Twitter handle, but you are also awesome. Know what you are prepared to share and what you are not. If possible, have someone you can debrief with afterwards. Learn about sharing ethically. Don't be forced to share anything you're not comfortable with. Oh, I totally agree with that. Krista says, be honest. The vulnerability can be terrifying, but it's also so powerful. Fuck the people want to hear. Share your truth. Again, insert witticism here. Joining from the UK. Okay, cool. So thank you all for that. And before we get to question 3, since we have a few minutes before we get to that, if any of you, Hudson or Joelle, Hudson's back with the pig. So let's just do the piggy update since we have a couple minutes. Hudson.
Hi, Rudy. We're okay. Hamlet the pig has had a very good day. He's also very tired. He's growing a lot. That's about all we have from the ham update, Rudy.
Cool. Joelle or Hudson, if you have any additional questions for Sarah, or want to speak on the topic further, or any of the tweets that you saw, feel free to. We have a couple of minutes before we get to question number 3.
I have a question.
Sure.
I would somewhat a follow-up to the last one, Sarah. When you read something, like, I've done some editing work, I've done some writing work, and I feel like a lot of times you're able to somewhat understand when something grabs you right at the beginning. And I know that a lot of the stories you tell are from people that may not be writers, but what are the things that you see in that, that elevator window that really grabs you to say, let's work with this writer, or let's make this story, with more richness? What do you look for?
Yeah, some of my favorite types of stories that we get aren't necessarily the ones that are the most well written, but are the ones that describe something that maybe other people experience but like don't have the words for. So the stories, especially about suicide, that tend to like resonate with the most people are the ones that get very specific about a certain aspect of suicidality that isn't normally spoken about. So I think people assume people outside of the space assume suicide is very black or white. You either want to live or you want to kill yourself. So the stories that grab me tends to be the one that are willing to get very specific into a certain element of being suicidal. And if someone can really like describe that in like a really in a really engaging way, that usually ends up being a really special story. Just because, like I think Rudy, you mentioned before about how like we're so used to seeing one kind of narrative. I mean, Jess and people who are listening right now, they've done so much great work about kind of like the one good suicide attempt to write a narrative, right? So anything that kind of, I don't want to say deviates from that, but anything that kind of gets more specific and explores more, is it usually ends up being a really important story that people need to hear.
Now, let me ask you, Sarah, real quick before we get to question number 3. Is there anything inherently wrong with someone sharing that story if that's their narrative?
No. Oh, you mean like the more like mainstream suicide
Yeah.
narrative?
Yeah.
No, no, of course not. No, and that's the thing too. And when I said wrong, there's no wrong journey, you know? Like I think the only way your story can be wrong is if you assume is the more correct way of than everyone else's. Like your story can't be wrong as long as you're not using your story as like a weapon to like shut down other people's stories. But there's nothing wrong with people who, yeah, who maybe feel like, yeah, this is like yucky, who maybe feel like their story is like kind of more typical. We just have to make room for other people's stories who maybe yeah, who feel like they don't necessarily fit like the mainstream conversation. So all stories, there needs to be a diverse narratives in this space, especially.
Right. I agree. Let's get to question number 3. And let me bring that up. And that question is, what are some things to stay away from when sharing your story? And I was actually going to ask something else, and then I realized, oh, this probably ties in better with this question anyway. So let's get back to you, Sarah.
Yeah, I mean, I think like an obvious one with suicide that is typically like you typically really don't need it is focusing too much on methods. I know that like, yeah, like we have these suicide reporting guidelines and how quote unquote important they are is up for debate. There's actually been very interesting and important conversations recently about, you know, like what is censoring, you know, who made these guidelines, who are they from? And those are all really valid. But when I think about kind of staying away from focusing on methods, it really makes me think more about not the danger, but the potential harm of sensationalizing suicide and making it just about the methods and not actually making it about the person's life and what happened to them and kind of like what led them to that moment. I think that when we, you know, there's a reason why, for example, like when TMZ reports on a suicide, they put the method in the headline. It's not because they care about this person's truth or they care about, you know, not, I don't know, censoring someone's stories. It's because that's the most like, that's like the juicy detail, quote unquote, of the story that they feel like will make people more interested. And I think that a lot of news sites use those details, like I said, as kind of like more juicy, like pieces than to actually help tell the story. And usually like 9 times out of 10, like if you delete in my experience, if you kind of don't focus on the method, your story is still really important. And I think I'm like taking words from someone else, like maybe Des or something, but this idea too, that it's like sensationalize certain methods, makes it feel like people's suicide attempts were like worse or better. Because it's like, you know, for example, if someone jumps off a certain bridge, they might get more attention than someone who had a less public, quieter suicide attempt. And focusing those types of things in these stories just takes away, I think, from a lot of the good discussion that could have. So that's like, I think, the main thing to stay away from for a variety of reasons.
What say you, Hudson Harris at Mental Strategy? Unmute your mic, Hudson.
Sorry about that. I was actually hoping you would call me last because I wanted to hear what everybody else had to say. It's weird. So my professional background, I'm an attorney, and I have this weird programming in my brain around attorney-client privilege. And for me, what I always keep out is everyone. And like, I was thinking about this, Sarah, as you were talking. I'm like, that's a really weird thing to want to say, but like, it's true. Like I keep all of the major players of what's happened in my story out because I don't want, you know, God, family, friends, anyone. Like, it's odd, but like to me, that's what I keep. Like, and the story that I tell and when I share what I've been through over the past, you know, however long I've been on this planet, I generally tend to fog out specific individuals because I don't necessarily want them involved. I don't want things to go back, that type of thing. So like, that's mine. I actually try and keep everyone else out of my story, which is odd as I say it.
Let's get to the Twitter chat while we're waiting for Joelle to get back with us. And okay, so do.
Can I ask Sarah another question while we're waiting?
Sure. Well, let me get to some of the tweets because I want to make sure.
This is great, Hudson.
Yeah, I want to make
Let
sure
me get
people
the
on the
chat.
Twitter chat are part of the conversation because you are just as much as part of hashtag SPSM Chat as we are. Kat says specific med treatments, also anything that may be too hard for me to share in the moment. Honestly, self-care first. Yeah, no, I totally get that. We had another tweeter mention that share what you feel comfortable and don't feel forced into sharing anything that you're not comfortable with, and that's very valid
That's
too.
so important. That's so important. I love that point actually because I think that's actually number one, right? There's like the stuff that actually makes good storytelling. There's like the guidelines, but the number one thing is, and I think Hudson, like you kind of, that's what you're alluding to, like only sharing things that make you comfortable. Like there's a lot of pressure now, I feel like, to feel like if your story is public, like it counts more. And how, like, yeah, like you don't have to be necessarily an open book to be a good, suicide prevention advocate, and protecting yourself is so important.
Can I?
Okay.
Can I ask a follow up on that one, Rudy?
Sure.
So you bring up a question that's been bouncing around in my brain. There was a university at the beginning of this week who some hullabaloo was made by by one of the peers that comes in to help bring onboard freshmen that said that having people say their pronouns at the beginning, and I'm crossing a lot of streams here, and I'm sorry everyone, but having people say their pronouns at the beginning of freshman year actually created this pressure around even defining yourself or what you're doing or where you are and all this stuff. And my question, like, is almost like a dovetail of that. Like, there is almost a pressure to tell your story. There is almost a pressure that if you tell your story and if people know your story, it almost makes it more real or you more valid or your opinion more valid. There's something in there about like how you choose to define yourself and the pressure we put on people now where we're like, you have to define yourself. You need to tell us who you are and what your pronouns are. And I have to know, like, at the same token, like, I can't tell you how many times I've been at conferences and have people be like, so why do you go into mental health? Why, there's like this almost push to understand why someone would ever do it.
What say you to that, Sarah?
No, I think you're exactly right. And I think like for me it's a little personal. Like I always like kind of give myself a hard time because I have a hard time kind of being like a person on the internet, like us being someone who like tweets a lot and shares a lot. It's like very much against my nature. And I think that making sure that we're making room for people to still be involved, even if they're not going to be, not everyone needs to be like the I'm a public like storyteller person or like my story is forefront to my work. Like some people just want to be here because they really enjoy doing the work. And I think the most important thing is that if they're choosing not to disclose their story, they're doing so because it's personal to them and not because they feel ashamed. I think what's tricky, I think the reason why there's been such a robust pressure, especially for like more professionals to tell their story is because for too long it was the exact opposite, right? It was this idea of like a lot of people, even if they had lived experience in the suicide prevention field, wouldn't talk about it because that was seen as taboo. It would make them feel less professional, less qualified for their jobs. And now this beautiful thing is happening where, and I want to say it's like, everything's fine now, but it is becoming more accepting, and a lot of professionals have been opening up about their stories. And being like a person on the internet is a thing where you can be very open about your stories. And so I think we're in a very interesting space, Hudson. I think that you were kind of alluding at where, yeah, like now it's so amazing that people with lived experience in some capacities are being encouraged to speak. But then how do we get the people who don't necessarily want to be that forthcoming? Or I think Jess said this too, this idea of like, yeah, a lot of the times like the storytelling isn't really just for the sake of storytelling. It's usually to, benefit an organization or benefit something else. It gets really complicated. So yeah, I think people have their need to know, like, that I always say this, like whether you publish an article on the internet or you like talk to your friend about it, like those aren't, to me, like aren't different. They are, one's not more important than the other. And like we need people to be doing like all sorts of different things, not just, whatever.
Okay, let's go to Joelle and then we'll go to question number 4. But Joelle, what are some things to stay away from when sharing your lived experience story?
So I wasn't on to hear the other answer, so sorry if I repeat. I think that first, it depends why you're sharing your story. If you are sharing your story more for yourself, I would say the only thing to stay away from is exposing too much. Make sure that you're not making yourself too vulnerable, that you are comfortable with what you're sharing. If there are other reasons you're sharing it, if you're sharing it to really gain empathy for anyone experiencing what you're experiencing, attempt to not be too divisive. Not in the way that what you're sharing can be divisive or challenging, but maybe attempt not to alienate people completely. I do think we should challenge people, but always leave a little bit of room for discussion. And just generally knowing your audience, knowing what is something that will be approachable or relatable in some way for them. Other than that, I don't think there's a lot that we need to necessarily stay away from. Not a lot. I don't know.
No worries. Let's go to question number 4. This is the last question, and then we'll go into final thoughts. We got about 18 minutes left. So question number 4, what can people with lived experience do beyond just sharing their story? And then again, if you're participating in the Twitter chat, I think everyone gets it by now. So just use A4, reply to SPSM Chat, or do it on your own account. That's totally fine. Just make sure you use the hashtag SPSM. And if for whatever reason, I was going to say like the live, if you're watching this, you know where the live stream is. So twitter.com/SPSM Chat. Let's go back to Sarah. Let me unmute here. Okay, so what can people with lived experience do beyond just sharing their story?
I think this is the first thing that came to mind, propping up other people's stories. So yes, like your story is important, and yes, like everyone should have a place to share your story, but this kind of goes back to what I was saying before about kind of people getting like pretty focused on seeing everything from their own perspective. And I think that more people could do a better job, but it's also equally as important to share other people's stories, especially people who have been traditionally more marginalized in the suicide prevention space. I'm a white woman, and not that my story is not important, but my story can't be the only story. I have to make sure that people who come from different places as me, or their stories should be equally, if not more, as loud as mine. So that's something I would say, like owning your story, telling your story. Everyone's story is really important. And then making sure that if when in the context of you telling your story, you're propping up other people who maybe don't have as big of a platform as you do.
Hudson.
No, because like Sarah took my answer, and like I actually like planned this one out. So I'm going to give it anyway. I don't care. Similar vein, but like I have a brief anecdote about this. I have several people in my life who are my gut check. So something comes up, or there's an opportunity, or there's something that makes me go or whatever. Like these are the people that I gut check, and like I have different people for different focus areas. I'm certainly hopeful that some of you are watching out there. But what I've found is that I had an opportunity to get on a very large stage, and part of that was really focused on giving voice to others. And it was something that I really struggled with, because I even struggled with whether or not I should be involved in it at all. And what one of my friends said is, they said, look, like you have a voice that people want to hear. For whatever reason, they didn't agree, and I understand it. It's a little bit of self-deprecation, but it's true. Like people do want to hear sometimes what I have to say, but I have to use that for good. I have to be able to say, I'm not what's important here. What I want to do is just what Sarah said before she stole it from me. Give other people a voice, give the marginalized populations a voice. So like, I've been, working before and have people, rattle off some of the statistics that we're all familiar with, and then everybody nod and go, okay, well, that's when I said, actually, like if you guys looked into the statistics of what they are for marginalized populations, and nobody has. So I think that there's a stand-up thing of saying, hey, we're in a field that the research is incredibly biased. I'm a white male, similar to what Sarah said. Like, I have a story, but I'd rather use my box as it is to give other people a story. And I think that's really the thing is, I want to give people that voice, because I tell you, like, when I've had the opportunity to help people share their story, whether to a friend or to an audience, like, I've got goosebumps right now. There's nothing more magical and powerful than helping give people that voice.
Joelle.
So what Hudson and Sarah both said. But I also think that, and this is, so what I'm about to say is not, we don't all have to do this, because we don't all have to accept burden upon burden. When I answered the question before, I did say, we should try not to alienate people, but we also don't have to put up with a bunch of bullshit. So that said, I do think that we can choose at times to be open to challenge. So when we share our stories, and I just tweeted about this, when we share our personal lived experience, it is a challenge to this typical narrative that a lot of people hear, this usually one singular narrative that people hear. And for me, understanding that it's seen as like a challenge to what people think they know, helps me. And if I can understand that in response to what I'm saying, then it can help me to get through to people a little more and maybe communicate with them better. So having that understanding and really seeing that people are just being very challenged by what you're sharing, instead of that people are always being jerks or just always trying to control you, can really help. But we don't always have to be that person. We don't always have to tolerate people treating us poorly. So that is one thing we can do, is we can step a little further and meet people who are challenging us, but we don't have to do that.
Yeah, and this question is something that I've struggled with, and I kind of asked it for selfish reasons, just so like I could hear all of your perspectives. And like I do public speaking. I've been sharing my story since 2014, and feel like I've like hit a ceiling as far as like just sharing my story over and over again. I try to incorporate elements of interviewing. So like I'll go out into the audience and get their stories as well and just ask them questions like how I would ask all of you right now. And it's been so liberating. And like every speech I want to do something like that because it can be so different. I mean, one of my main talents that I've learned in just the past couple years is being able to elevate others. And I'm glad, Sarah, that you mentioned that as well. Is like when I do my storytelling events, my open mic storytelling events, I share my story, of course, to start off and set the right tone. But I step back and let people go up one after another, share their story, no filter, no censoring. And people will sometimes go way out there, but I let them do that because they don't normally have that platform. And I feel honored to do it. Just giving a platform. It's easier than it sounds. Just step back, use your privilege, and do all you can to use that privilege to make sure that others who normally wouldn't have an opportunity to share their story to do so. I mean, especially when one has the ability to provide a platform like me, why make it all about you? Why does it always have to be the Rudy Caseres show? So I love these answers so far. Let's go on to the tweet chat, and then we'll go to our final thoughts. So I got to go back to the other tab and start scrolling. Again, hey, Jess. Stop talking, Hudson.
Hey, ask Sarah a question.
Hold on. I want to make sure people in the Twitter chat have a voice as well. So again, SPSM Chat. Krista, can you retweet Jess's tweet? I want to make sure people read her articles because they're very important. So Elise says, I'm not sure which question this fits into, sort of both 2 and 3, but make sure if you're talking about, I'm sorry, Hudson, but make sure if you're talking about your story and it includes you getting better, that includes the privileges that helped you get there. Thank you so much, Elise. Also, Elise is at Elise Swiriani Design on Instagram. It's got like 20, 40 million followers at this point. Lena says, I agree with Sarah that protecting oneself is so important. At least it is for me. There are parts of my story that are public. There are a lot of parts that are private, and I respect my own boundary on what I feel comfortable sharing out. Elise says it's important that we name privileges that come with being able to access treatment, pay for treatment and or insurance, and to get good and effective treatment. Desiree says, I try to stay away from platitudes. Nothing is ever as simple as it gets better. I feel that. Jess says, yes. Amelia says, anyone else's SPSM live feed super lagorific. I always love it when Amelia is here for tech support. Krista says, also recovery healing whatever isn't a linear. Actually, people do answer that question. I want to know. Also, recovery healing whatever isn't a linear thing, and saying it gets better can make people feel like they failed when they have a bad day. At Mackie Doll says, don't be callous in regards to details. This is to question 3. Don't be callous in regards to details shared. There are things like TE that is incredibly important to stay conscious of. Your words and those of others may not be harsh to your well-being, but may validly harm another. Something I'd love to be better at myself. So many great tweets. I'm sorry if I don't get to all of them. Usually, I'm not used to this much engagement. I think that's because we're getting into the fall season, so more of you are getting back into that suicide prevention mode, because it's Suicide Prevention Month all over the globe. Elise says, I always struggle with this because there are some situations in which it can sometimes get better, i.e. getting older and moving out of adolescence typically helps in some ways. But it's trite to make a blanket statement like that. Yes, blanket statements are never bueno. Jess Stolman Rainey says, support and prioritize stories from people more marginalized. That's to question number 4. Elise says, figure out how to hold your experience and the experiences of others at the same time, specifically those whose experiences were very different than your own. That's something to continue each day. Let me just see how much more we got to go before I spend another 20 minutes on this. So let me just scroll real quick just to make sure everyone gets seen. But
a lot of tweets, Rudy.
I know. I'm not used to
minute.
this. I thought it was just going to be a few tweets I'd read, but thank you, Lena. Thank you, Elise. I'm just going to scroll up just to make sure people at least get their tweets on screen.
So, Sarah, what's your roommate making for dinner? That's not my question, but I'm just wondering. She's been back there a while.
Grace, what are you making for dinner that people want to know? I'll get that answer, Hudson. Don't worry. What was that? Miso ramen bowls. She is a professional chef. Hudson, let's be
I
friends.
love that. Yes, no, seriously. Hudson lives in San Diego, and so come up here anytime. Or you know what? If you can fit into my Miata, Sarah, like me, you, Anime, our dog, and Joelle, we'll just go down to Hudson's and we'll go barbecue. We'll have some wino, and we're gonna all have a good time. Oh, okay. First off, I want to give a shout out to Leia because she just tweeted for the first time. Says, "Hey all, sorry to jump in late here. I actually never advocate people just tell their story and sit down. Please don't ask people to do that either. You can include some kind of call to action or describe what you want people to do as a result of what they heard." And I'm going to go back to we're going to go to final thoughts. I just wanted to make sure that I got to as many as possible, and I did not. I failed at that. So final thoughts, and we'll go back to Sarah, and Hudson's got the piggies out. So Sarah, final thoughts for SPSM Chat, sharing your lived experience story.
Final thoughts. I guess my final thought, I kind of already said this, but I like to emphasize this idea of you don't have to be doing something publicly for it to count. And finding ways to, make suicide normal to talk about among your friends, finding ways to support other people, whether it be through online support groups or even just keeping yourself, taking care of yourself is going to be a radical act on its own. I think that there's a lot of pressure to make storytelling a certain way. And I also would actually want to echo what Leia said, because I think that's also really important. This idea that, again, we have to be careful, and I'm coming from a publication on the internet of organizations who like using storytelling for storytelling's sake, but then don't necessarily want to listen to the people who are telling those stories to actually make any change. So those are, I guess, my two final thoughts. The thought that don't feel like there's pressure to like be a public person. Like whatever you do to take care of yourself as a private person is totally valid too. And if you are someone who doesn't just have a story to tell, but has ideas and has thoughts about how to actually make the mental health system better, don't let people reduce you to someone whose just job it is to tell your story, then step aside. Make sure that there's ways for you to get involved, and organizations can do a better job making sure that's the case too.
And how can people connect with you, Sarah?
I guess on Twitter it's so hard. How does you know better than me, Rudy? How do you keep in touch with me?
Sarah's phone number is
Twitter. Follow me on Twitter. I've been pretty quiet recently, but that does tend to be where at least I'm the most active occasionally.
Okay, Hudson.
So my final words to you are to find something joyful this week. Even if it's this little dude Hamlet, find something joyful. I find that I have a child psychologist. I don't know if she's watching, but she's incredible. And she told me what she tells parents is that parenting is all joy and no fun. And it keeps resonating with me like over and over again how real that is. But I think it also applies to a lot of things. And like the things that you're going through there, going through out there tonight, they're challenging. I've talked to some of you I know today and yesterday through really hard things. It's really hard, but try and do the things that make you feel a little bit of joy and a little bit of happiness, and then really, really go after figuring out a way to share your story. For some people, it's writing. For some people, it's music. For some people, it's interpretive dance. Rudy does an incredible interpretive dance about his story.
You're damn right I do.
Sure.
But find a way to tell it. More than anything, I think we all need a voice and we all need a path to do it. So if you want ideas, tag me. I'd love to brainstorm. Let's find a way to tell your story.
Awesome. Let's go to Joelle. And sorry, Devil No Angel on Periscope, I believe. Sorry, he's speaking Russian, so I can't be able to translate your comments. So hopefully they're all good. Joelle, final thoughts?
I do think it is important to share your story. It's important to share it in a way that's comfortable for you. And like Sarah said, it doesn't have to be on a huge platform. It doesn't have to be on a huge stage. It doesn't have to be an article in a large publication. It can be with one other person, and it can be in any way you want to share it. It could be a photograph you take that expresses whatever you want to have it express. So it's important to share whatever aspect of your experience you want to share in the way that you want to share it. And I do think that in sharing your experience, it is important to promote other people's voices as well, and always be doing that. If you prefer a certain definition for yourself and your experience, always mention that other people with similar experiences may use another terminology or may not use terminology at all. Things like that are simple, small ways to promote other people's voices and expand the knowledge and get away from this single narrative that people see as the truth.
Rudy Caseres, at Rudy Caseres on Twitter. What are your final thoughts? Well, here are my final thoughts for today. And I'm going to quote Dr. Bart Andrews, one of the OGs of SPSM Chat, is that we need to go beyond sharing your lived experience. We need to be able to share our lived expertise. And that's a very big differentiator, because it's like everyone has a story to tell. Everyone has lived experience in some way, but we need to harness that and be able to really refine that in a way that is effective, whether it's moving an audience, whether it's advocating for legislation, whether it's protesting against something, hell, whether it's tweeting or doing SPSM Chat. SPSM Chat is more than just us like being on our soapboxes. We try to cite research. We try to push the narrative further. We give others a voice at the table as well. We bring in experts like Sarah Schuster, and that is very important. So we need to go beyond sharing our lived experience story and become lived expertise experts, I guess. I hate the word expert because what is an expert? Who gets to decide who's an expert and so on and so forth? But that's basically what I'm trying to say. Now, let's go to the Twitter chat one last time before we wrap it up. I want to make sure that we give people all the shout outs in the world, and then we're going to close it home. It's already 7 p.m.
We're going to do the
Pacific
Brady
time.
Bunch thing again? Who's below
Yeah,
me?
you're damn right we will.
Hi, Joelle. Hi, Sarah.
So yeah, I don't know if you can see this, Hudson, but I'm just scrolling up through
No, I
the
see
Twitter
it.
feed. Okay, cool. Just to make sure that, and again, thank you, Krista Marie, for being our chat moderator. Elise says, I'm also part of the clinician group as a therapist in training, yet the lived experience connections are where I feel at home. Ooh, that's a good topic for...
She's also doing her thesis on that. So if you're a mental health therapist or clinician with lived experience, please reach out to Elise. She's doing her thesis on that and wants to talk to you.
Yes, definitely. And okay, I think I'm all caught up. So let's go back to our Brady Bunch finale. And that is going to do it. See you next Sunday. That's September 22nd. Let me just hide that. So next week, our guests, Desiree Stage, Jess Stolman Rainey, who are the co-host of the new hotness, the podcast, Suicide and Stuff. You can watch that on Facebook, and I think they also put it on YouTube, and I think there's an audio version coming out. Sorry if I'm like misquoting you, Desiree, but you can come on next Sunday, Desiree and Jess, and set the story straight. Yes, so watch that next week. Hopefully. Yeah, thank you everyone for tuning in. I love how the audience keeps building up more and more and more. I'm glad that we're finally able to get our groove going. Thank you so much to Marie. I almost forgot that for taking over host while I was doing my storytelling event. You did an awesome job, Marie. I appreciate you. She'll be back first Sunday of October. Yes, and thank you, Hudson, for being a part of that as well last week. And last but not least, happy birthday to Danielle Glick, who is hopefully in a good place right now, celebrating. You are loved, Danielle. Hopefully I can connect you with Sarah sometime soon. She's in Connecticut, so maybe next time you're in the East Coast, Sarah, you can check that out. Okay, so again, let's do our finale. Wave, everyone. And always remember,
hold your piggies closed.
I was going to say keep your piggies. Okay, this is my closing line.
Okay.
Hold your piggies close.
Yes.